Alright, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Sample Breakdown, but not really. I figured that after I made my trilogy of JPEGMAFIA sample breakdowns, we ought to switch up the format a little bit. So today we're actually going to be conducting quite possibly the first ever sample versus breakdown, or as I like to call it, sample for sample, where I compare the quality of samples across two albums track by track. Basically, it's just my hit battle series, but with samples instead of songs. And assuming you've already read this video's title, you'll know that our first ever verses in this series will be between Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and Yeezus, also by Kanye West. Two of the best rap albums ever made, created by one of the greatest samplers of all time, and both unsurprisingly with a shit ton of samples. I mean, what could be a better start? But yeah, with all of that out of the way, let's just get into round one. Alright, and kicking off round one, we've got Dark Fantasy versus On Site. So starting with Dark Fantasy, it's got one sample and two interpolations to go over. First off, the Can We Get Much Higher refrain is actually a sample from a 1983 Mike Oldfield track titled In High Places.
Can we get much higher? Can we get much lighter? Can we get much higher? So high.
It's funny, I always thought that refrain was just Justin Vernon or Tiana Taylor doing some weird voice, but turns out I'm an idiot, I guess. There's also the spoken word intro by Nicki Minaj, which is an interpolation of Roald Dahl's retelling of the Cinderella story in his 1982 poetry collection Revolting Rhymes.
The phony one, the one you know, was cooked up years and years ago and made to sound all soft and sappy just to keep the children happy.
It made it sound all whack and corny. Yes, it's awful blasted boring.
If you listen to the two back-to-back, though, you'll actually notice that Nicki's version uses a bunch of different wording than Roald Dahl's, or as Genius likes to call it, a thugification of the poem. Interesting word choice. And finally, we get what's technically an interpolation of the 2010 BET Awards Good Music Cypher with Kanye's Urkel line.
Fresh air rolling down the window. Too many Urkels on your team, that's why your wind's low. Fresh air rolling down the window. Too many Urkels on your team, that's why your wind's low.
But I mean, come on, the cypher was less than a month before Dark Twisted Fantasy came out. Kanye clearly just reused the line, so calling it an interpolation just seems like a little bit of a stretch. Anyways, moving on to On Site, and we've only got one sample to go over. And let's be honest, you already know what it is. The iconic gospel interlude that comes in at a minute 16 within the song is surprisingly enough not an actual sample, but rather a studio recreation by the Holy Name of Mary Choral Family Choir of the 1986 track Sermon, He'll Give Us What We Really Need. Now, as for which song takes the first round, I'm absolutely going On Site. Kinda crazy that Yeezus gets the first point against an album known for having some of the most legendary sampling of all time, but the sample's juxtaposition with the rest of On Site, along with the lyrics being pretty much the entire theme of Yeezus, just make it too memorable to lose for me. Next up though, we've got Gorgeous versus Black Skinhead. Definitely both on the bottom half of their respective albums when it comes to samples, but still, there's some fun stuff to check out in each. So starting with Gorgeous, we've got its incredible guitar riff, courtesy of a 1969 cover of the song You Showed Me by Enoch Light and the Glittering Guitars. There's just such a gorgeous tone to that guitar, and the chop is simple but brilliant. And an interpolation on here that I've never even catched until now is actually from Illmatic's Memory Lane Sittin' in the Park by Nas.
It's like that, y'all. It's like that, y'all. It's like that, y'all. That, y'all. It's like that, y'all. I don't really give a fuck about it at all. Cause the same people.
God, it is so hard to listen to that part of the song and not quote the Black Balls line. But as for Black Skinhead, we've only got one pretty small sample, coming from the 1997 track by the Black Lodge singers Warpaint / Soulja Boy.
Baby, we living in the moment. I've been a menace for the longest, but I ain't finished. I'm devoted.
I totally would have guessed that the tribal drums on Black Skinhead would have been a sample, but turns out it is just that little war chant. Still though, I think it adds so much energy to what's already a super visceral song. But even with that, this is a pretty easy win for Gorgeous, I think. Now we've got Power versus I Am a God, and I know, this round is a blowout, but still, I Am a God has a pretty cool sample. Starting with Power though, and we've got 4 samples to go over, and at least 2 of them are in the Hip Hop Sample Hall of Fame in my opinion, which is insanely impressive. First there's its famous vocal chant from the 1978 Continent No. 6 song, Afro-America. Then there's there's the 21st Century Schizoid Man refrain that breaks up the chorus, which unsurprisingly comes from King Crimson's 1969 track, 21st Century Schizoid Man. Next, of course, we have one of the most sampled drum loops of all time, with the 1969 Cold Grit song, It's Your Thing, and I think its second appearance in my sample breakdown series.
In this white man world, we the ones chosen. So good night, cool world. I see you in...
And finally, we have a glorified sound effect of an air raid siren from Jack Holzman's universally acclaimed album, Authentic Sound Effects Volume 3. So thank you very much for that, Jack.
That 21st century, doing something mean to it. Do it better than anybody you ever seen.
I mean, what can I even say about Power that hasn't already been said already? It's a song that truly embodies the sheer power of sampling as an art form in the best way possible. But I'm a God is pretty cool too, with its sample coming from the 2001 track by Jamaican artist Capleton called Forward in a Dem Close. I don't have the patois, I'm sorry.
Blazing, me do man them, me need them. Blazing, oh them blazing, me do man them, me need them. Blazing.
Now I scoured the internet trying to find any reason as to why there were so many Jamaican samples on Yeezus, as you'll see coming up later, but all I can assume after looking is that Kanye just thought that their voices sounded cool. Kinda anticlimactic, but a cool sample nonetheless. However, it does not stand a chance against the absolute juggernaut that is Power, meaning it's now 2-1 for Dark Twisted Fantasy. Moving on to round 4 now, and we've got Monster versus New Slaves. And before anyone says anything about Monster technically being track 5 on Dark Twisted Fantasy, yes, I checked, and the 4th track, All of the Lights, has no listed samples, so we're just gonna be skipping over that one. But starting with Monster, we've got again 1 sample, 1 interpolation. Firstly, there's this background applause in the instrumental, which comes from the 1971 track The Hosen Church by actress and comedian LaWanda Page.
LaWanda! I'ma need to see your fucking hands at the concert. I'ma need to see your fucking hands at the concert.
Such a weird sample, considering Kanye could have gotten a crowd clapping sound effect from literally anywhere, but whatever. And we've got a Napoleon Dynamite interpolation in here of all things.
What are you gonna do today, Napoleon?
Whatever I feel like I wanna do, gosh.
Know that motherfucker well. What you gonna do now? Whatever I wanna do. Gosh, it's cool now.
Gosh! You have no idea how many takes I've done of this. Now moving on to New Slaves, and we've got a new record for this video with 5 total samples/interpolations to go over. First up, we have the real bones of the song, which come from an unreleased Teacher's track titled Cruel Cold Winter. Not related to the scrapped Cruel Summer sequel as far as I can tell, just a coincidence.
Broke nigga race him, that's that don't touch anything in the stove. And it's rich nigga race him, that's that come in, please buy more.
And if you're wondering how New Slaves, which came out in 2013, can sample a song from 2014, essentially Kanye and his team had teachers create this track as a demo during the creation process of Yeezus, and so after it became New Slaves, the original demo was released a year later. Now next up, we've got a case of what I like to call sampleception. You'll see what I mean in just a second. Basically, the super chopped up scream in the intro technically comes from the 2013 Dutch E. Germ song HBA War, but HBA War itself samples Kanye's own Power remix, specifically the outro from Swizz Beatz.
I got the power, motherfucker, if you didn't know.
Chill, man, chill, yeah, chill.
So yeah, this scream has a little bit of a family tree if you go back far enough, although to be fair, that's a lot more common than you'd think with sampling. Thirdly, we have this little drum section coming from a 2007 track by electronic band Salem called Lucifer.
Spinning everything on Alexander Wang, New Slaves.
Now for the soul interpolation here, and it's another case of Kanye reusing lyrics. The whole rather be a dick than a swallower bit is actually originally from a 2004 track off of one of Kanye's mixtapes titled Gossip Files.
We the leaders, and they the followers, and we the nut busters, and they the swallowers. You see his leaders, and his followers, but I'd rather be a dick than a swallower.
But saving the best for last, of course, we've got the indescribably beautiful outro of the track, coming from a 1969 song by Hungarian rock band Omega titled
Gyöngy hajú lány,
which supposedly translates to girl with pearl hair.
On a
I'm not familiar with the music of Omega, but damn, I might need to check out more of their stuff now knowing that they're behind one of the most heavenly samples I've ever heard. This is definitely not the easiest round we've seen so far, but I think New Slaves takes it pretty handedly. Next you've got So Appalled versus Hold My Liquor, and the sample-heavy songs are certainly not stopping with this round. So Appalled has one pair of samples and one pair of interpolations to go over for 4 total, starting with the main sample of the instrumental, which comes from a 1979 track by Manfred Mann's Earth band, You Are, I Am.
One hand in the air, if you don't really care. 2 hands in the air, if you don't really care. It's like
Definitely a more traditional sample on Dark Twisted Fantasy, I guess, but still, the atmosphere of the original track works super well with the dark, dramatic sound of So Appalled. Next up, we've got another sampling juggernaut with the 1972 Lynn Collins track, Think About It.
I'm so appalled, spalled and bald and Donald Trump taking dollars from y'all.
Other songs that sample Think About It include Sin Miedo by JPEGMAFIA, Musician by Porter Robinson, Church Girl by Beyonce, and Dance with the Devil by Immortal Technique. Jesus Christ, I forgot that song existed, and now my life is infinitely worse for remembering it. Anyways, distracting myself from that, next up we have an interpolation of Jay-Z's 1996 track, Can't Knock the Hustle.
My cup runneth over with hundreds. I'm one of the best niggas that done it.
my cup overrunneth with hundreds. Dummy, damn, it's hard not for me to waste it.
And finally, another interpolation, this time the iconic Harvey Dent quote from The Dark Knight.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Dark night feeling, die you be a hero, but live long enough to see yourself become a villain.
Pretty cool batch on this track with probably the coolest interpolations we've covered so far, but in my opinion, the Earth Band sample is definitely doing a lot of heavy lifting. And I Want to Hold My Liquor, it's only got one sample to cover, albeit a very cool one in my opinion. Part of the instrumental comes from a 2013 interlude by Venezuelan musician Arca called Feminine. Now, Arca actually has a bunch of production credits across Yeezus, but I only bring her up specifically because during my research, I discovered that she has some absolutely ridiculous album covers. I'll show some of them up on the screen right now, and just tell me that these aren't some of the most visually striking covers you've seen in a minute. Really cool stuff. With all that said though, I still think I'm gonna go with So Appalled for this round, but this is definitely the closest one so far. Getting into the latter half of the track list now with a score of 3-2 in favor of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. And we've got another blowout round with Devil in a New Dress versus I'm In It. With Devil in a New Dress, despite it only having one sample, it's probably the best on the entire record. A record, mind you, with some of the most famous samples in all of rap, no less. It of course samples the 1973 Smokey Robinson track, Will You Love Me Tomorrow? I mean, come on. Pure euphoria. And interestingly enough, Devil in a New Dress is the only track on Dark Twisted Fantasy that has no production credits from Kanye himself, despite it being a highlight instrumental of his career. And I know you're probably writing off I'm In It right now, but I think it, and all of Yeezus for that matter, is pretty underrated when it comes to its samples. First, we've got a sample in the background in the instrumental from the 2001 Kenny Lattimore song, Lately.
Is this just a dream? Thank God Almighty, they free at last. We was up at the party, but we was leaving fast.
Pretty cool bit of texture added into the beat, but still, this next sample is absolutely my favorite on the song, being from a 2012 track by musicians Steve Peters and Steve Rosen, titled 2 or 3 Fireflies.
She cut from a different textile. She love different kind of sex now. Black girl sipping white.
Such a haunting yet beautiful instrumental, and then you've got Ye dropping lines like "put my fist in her" like a civil rights sign over it. But I guess that is the inherent juxtaposition of Yeezus, right? Anyways, the last sample on the song is everyone's favorite, another sound effect. This time being a simple dog bark from what's apparently called the Sound Ideas Archive. Man, isn't that such a cool sample, guys? I know, I'm just being a hater, but the sound effect ones are just so boring to talk about. Not like it matters anyway, since we've already established the winner of this round. It's Devil in a New Dress, easily. Now we've got what you probably expect to be a much closer matchup than it actually is, with Runaway versus Blood on the Leaves. So starting off with Runaway, we've got its memorable drums coming from a 1971 track by the Backyard Heavies called Expo 83. I really really don't know how to describe it, but something about that drum sample has always just sounded so good to me, to the point where I genuinely think that the drums might be the best part of Runaway's instrumental. Heresy, I know. Next, though, is undoubtedly the song's most famous sample, with the repeating phrase of "look at ya" being from a 1981 live performance of the Rick James track Mary Jane.
Woo! Look at ya!
Whether there's just so much meaning and emotion put into that simple 3-word phrase within the context of Runaway, it's truly incredible. And last but not least, we have a pretty similar vocal sample, this time from a 1968 live album by James Brown, specifically his introduction to the stage on the track Introduction to Star Time.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Star Time at the Apollo Theater.
And just to be extra specific, technically this track was released in 2001 when a deluxe edition of the album was released, but the actual recorded audio is from '68. Despite how immaculate of a song Runaway really is, I do think it has some pretty minimal samples. Or at the very least, they don't play as much of a role into what makes the track so great as much as samples on other Kanye tracks do. Now as for the 4 samples/interpolations on Blood of the Leaves, they're anything but. First, of course, we've got the Nina Simone chop from her 1965 song Strange Fruit.
Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Then they talk.
Such an abrasive sample chop, but it fits so perfectly for a song like Blood on the Leaves. Next, we've got the infamous horns during the drop, which are from another unreleased track that was given to Kanye before Yeezus dropped. This time from the track Are You Ready by the musical duo Tonight, consisting of producers Hudson Mohawk and Lunis.
Said you had to tell somebody.
And speaking of Hudson Mohawk, he's another producer with a ton of production credits on Yeezus. And if his name sounds familiar to anyone, he's actually the creator of quite possibly the greatest sex song ever conceived, that of course being the legendary Seabat. Got that. Moving on from that though, and we've got another really cool background sample, being from the 1974 Isayo Tomita song, Snowflakes Are Dancing. And to close out the samples on the song, we've got an interpolation from the 1999 C Murder track, Down for My Neighbors.
Fuck them other niggas cause I'm down with my niggas. Fuck them other niggas cause I'm down with my niggas.
And fun fact about C Murder, turns out his name is very fitting considering he's currently serving a life sentence for his alleged connection to the murder of 16-year-old Steve Thomas. Actually, that's not a fun fact at all. But yeah, this might be a hot take, but I'm definitely going with Blood on the Leaves here. It's just got the better samples in my opinion. Alright, and on to round 8 now, and we've got Hell of a Life versus Guilt Trip. 2 criminally underrated tracks in their respective albums, and each with great samples. Starting with Hell of a Life, we've got 2 samples and an interpolation. First off, we have that fuzzy synth melody in the center of the beat, which is from the 1966 Mojo Men track, She's My Baby. And this is another one on Dark Twisted Fantasy that I had no idea was a sample until I researched it. I had always just assumed that this was Mike Dean shredding on a really distorted guitar preset, but alas, I was wrong. There's also a nasty sample from Tony Joe White's 1970 track Stud Spider.
Stud Spider.
I think I just fell in love with a porn star. Turn the camera on, she a porn star.
This man took the S sound from stud and turned it into a reverse hat. He is different. Oh yeah, and there's also the Iron Man interpolation in here that Kanye tried to resample on Carnival and almost got sued over. Moving on to Guilt Trip though, and we've actually got a pretty interesting sample to check out. Its main pitch down vocal sample is actually from the 2013 Pusha T song Blocka.
All in my guan, in my top, but I'm clear.
If you haven't listened to Blocka in full, I'd highly recommend it. It's got a super charming old Travis Scott hook and a great verse from Push. Super fun song. And to round it out, we've got an interpolation from the 1993 track by hip-hop trio Lords of the Underground, Chief Rocka.
One chief rocker, number one chief rocker, oh.
This is definitely another pretty close round for me, but I think I'm going to give the edge to Hell of a Life, purely because of that super creative stud spider chop. Meaning the score is now 5-3 in favor of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, so let's see if Yeezus can tie it up in the last 2 rounds. Now we reach undoubtedly the most controversial case of sampling with this next round between Blame Game and Send It Up. But I'll explain why after going over the 2 samples first. And yeah, there's actually only 1 sample per song in this round. Nice little break before the finale, I guess. Anyways, the sample on Blame Game is a recreation of the 2001 Aphex Twin track, April 14th.
Whose fault?
A very clean sample sound-wise, but a much less than clean story about how I got on the track in the first place. But before we get into that though, we gotta look at Send It Up sample, being from another Jamaican artist, this time from the 1995 Beanie Man track, Stop Livin' de Pass. I can't do it. I can't say it without it sounding goofy. I'm sorry, I'm not Jamaican. I can't.
Memories don't live like people do. They always remember you. Memories don't live like people do. They always remember you.
For what's easily the weakest song on Yeezus, I think the sample does hold up decently well. And yes, Send It Up is easily the worst track on Yeezus, and I will fight about that in the comments. There's no other option. Like, Guilt Trip, amazing song. I'm in it, kinda weird, but still amazing song. Send It Up is just so boring. It's like the only one that's not super experimental with its production, and the Kanye verse is whack. I hate it. Well, I don't hate it. I think it's alright, but it's just so obviously the weakest track. And there's a blooper actually. And if this was a standard matchup, I would easily give the round to Blame Game. However, there is one massive problem with the sample on it that has always left a bad taste in my mouth whenever I remember the story. So the man behind Aphex Twin, Richard David James, has claimed in interviews that Kanye's team allegedly tried to take credit for his sample legally in order to avoid paying him for the sample's clearance. James stated that the original sample had a bunch of digital artifacts and time stretches when Kanye and his team tried to sample it, which made him want to redo the sample for the team. But when he offered to redo the sample for them, apparently the team responded with the quote, "It's not yours, it's ours, and we're not even asking you anymore." I believe James was eventually paid for the sample as it was recreated, but still, if this story is true, what an absolutely asshole move from Kanye and his team. And as someone who loves the art of sampling and supports looser copyright restrictions on music, this whole interaction just screams Kanye-level ego, not to mention extremely unfair to a much less popular artist. So even if I like the sample on Blame Game more purely sample for sample, I can in good faith pick it over Send It Up knowing the full story. Do better, guys. But moving on from that whole fiasco, we're now at the final round between Lost in the World and Bound 2. And fittingly enough, these 2 tracks have by far the most samples to go through, so let's just get started with them. So Lost in the World has an absolutely ludicrous 7 samples to go through, but I'm actually going to be saving 2 of them for a little bonus round that I'm going to be doing. It'll make sense when we get there, trust me. But as for the other 5, we start with Justin Vernon's heartfelt sung intro coming from his 2009 Bon Iver track, Woods.
I'm up in the woods. I'm up in the woods.
Then we've got another Think About It sample for the drums. And next we've got another case of sampleception. Or I guess this would technically be interpolationception or something. Whatever, doesn't matter. Basically, it's an interpolation of Michael Jackson's famous interpolation of Manu Dibango's 1972 track Sol Makossa, which Michael interpolated on his 1982 track Wanna Be Startin' Something.
Mama cool, mama sa, mama kosa, mama cool, mama sa, mama kosa.
Mama say, mama Mako son, lost in this plastic life.
Oh, and it's also on Rihanna's Don't Stop the Music, for those who recognize it from that song. But moving on, we've got the tiniest vocal chop from the 1969 Eddie Bo song, Hook and Sling Part 1.
Yeah! Oh, 1, 2. I'm lost in the world.
And finally, another sound effect to go over from our favorite good old reliable sound effects library, the Hollywood Edge sound effects library. This one being titled, quote, Vulture lets out 2 very short squawks, and it's literally using the song for less than a second.
I'm lost in the world.
And you know what, I'll just go ahead and say it. It's almost sad that despite the sheer number of samples that Lost in the World has, it still can't hold a candle to Bound 2's sample pool. But I mean, come on, it's literally Bound 2. Probably the song with the best sample across all of Yeezus. That of course being the track's namesake sample, and actually the first ever sample I covered in my sample breakdown series back when I was only doing shorts, the 1971 song by the Ponderosa Twins +1, Bound.
All them other niggas lame and you know it now. When a real nigga hold you down.
I mean, you could write a whole paragraph about why this sample rocks. Everything from how well it functions as a throwback to Kanye's classic soul sampling, to how perfectly it works as the closing track to Yeezus, despite how different it sounds from the rest of the album, to simply how exquisite the sample itself sounds. It's truly the definition of a perfect sample in my opinion, even despite its popularity. But we've still got 3 more samples to cover besides Bound, starting with the uh-huh honey vocal, which comes from the 1959 Brenda Lee track Sweet Nothin's.
Uh-huh, honey. Alright. Uh-huh, honey.
What you doing in the club on a Thursday? She said she...
And yet another surprising one for me. Turns out Charlie Wilson's bridge melody takes heavy influence from the 1977 Wii song Aeroplane Reprise. And as for the final sample on Yeezus, it's an interpolation from the American sitcom Martin, specifically the Jerome's in the House scene that Kanye loves to reference in his music.
I think Jerome's in the house, watch your mouth, without a doubt, jumping on top.
Jerome's in the house, watch your mouth, Jerome's in the house.
Kinda sucks that we have to end with such an easy decision, but I'd be lying if I said that Bound 2 didn't easily clear Lost in the World sample-wise. And that means we actually end up with a final score of 5-5. Before we wrap up though, and I give my final take on which album actually has the better samples, let's talk about the 2 that I skipped over with the real final track on My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Who Will Survive in America. While the track is essentially just an extended outro of the previous, it features the 2 samples also present in Lost in the World. First up, there's the spoken word track from jazz poet Gil Scott-Heron titled Comment Number 1.
Who will survive in America? 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 Who will survive?
And as for the final sample that we'll be going over today, we've got another veteran track from my JPEGMAFIA sample breakdowns, that being Mountain's 1972 song Long Red.
I even want to hear the preacher spill or spiel, because God's whole God has been...
So yeah, if you really want proof of how influenced Peggy is by Kanye, I think this is the 3rd or 4th sample that both of them have used. And with that, we have officially finished the first ever sample breakdown versus on my channel. With a draw. Yeah, I should probably declare an actual winner between the 2 albums for the sake of not ending in such an anticlimactic fashion. So if I had to pick which record I thought had the better samples of the 2, sample for sample, I think I would have to go with... My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. But still, it is way closer than I would have ever imagined, given the samples are certainly not the focus of Yeezus like they are with Dark Twisted Fantasy. But with that decision finally made, we are now actually done with the verses. If you enjoyed, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel to see new uploads from me every single Saturday, unless I say otherwise in my community posts. Also, as always, leave a comment letting me know about any samples I might have missed in this video. I'm sure I missed at least one as usual with these videos of mine. And finally, if you'd like to support the channel further, you can now become a member and receive early access to my videos, as well as a special shout out from me in them, as you'll see on the screen right now. So join up if you're interested, it really does help me out a lot. But yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching. Bully is not coming out.